The last one, in Block C. I don't lock up at Brackenwell Park anymore. They offered me my shift back twice, and the second time the manager raised the pay, and I still said no. I never told him why. You can't put what happened to me into the kind of words that sound sane in an office during the day. For 11 years, I was the night caretaker at Brackenwell, a small ground on the eastern edge of a town called Marsden Vale. It's a lower league club, the kind most people have never heard of. Concrete terraces on 3 sides, a small covered stand on the 4th, a capacity of maybe 4,000 if you packed them in tight. The floodlights were old, 4 pylons that buzzed when they warmed up and took a full minute to die down after you killed the power. I knew every sound that ground made. That's important to understand, because it's the reason I knew, the moment I heard something wrong, that it was wrong. The night it happened was the County Cup final. Not a big match by the world standards. But for Marsden Vale it was the biggest night in years. The place was full. There was real noise, real heat off the crowd. The kind of evening where you can smell the beer and the fried onions from the burger vans drifting up over the terraces. We won on penalties. The town went mad. By 11:30 the crowd had drained out through the turnstiles. The players had done their lap, and the stewards had swept the stands and the concourses the way they always did. My job started when everyone else's ended. I waited for the stewards to sign out. I did my own walk of the ground. I shut down the lights and the boilers. I checked the gates, and I locked the place up for the night. Routine. I'd done it through league games, friendlies, weddings they'd held in the function room, a funeral once. It was just a building to me, a big, cold, empty building that I had a set of keys for. That night, I started my walk a little after midnight. The cleaning crew had gone, the stewards had gone. The car park lights were on a timer that would cut at 1. I had 3 of the 4 floodlight banks already off, and I was leaving the last one on just for the walk, the way I always did, so I could see the terraces while I checked for anyone who'd fallen asleep or got locked in. It happens more than you'd think. People drink, they wander off into a corner, they nod off, and you find them an hour later, confused and embarrassed. So when I saw someone sitting in the stands, my first thought wasn't fear. It was annoyance. It was, here we go, one more. He was in Block C. That's the covered stand, the seated one. And he was right up near the back, dead center, sitting very straight with his hands on his knees. Just a shape under the last of the floodlight, the plastic seats around him empty in every direction. I cupped my hands and called up that we were closed, that he needed to come down, that I'd let him out the side gate. My voice went up into the empty stand and came back to me, and he didn't move, not a flinch. I wasn't worried yet. Drunks don't always respond. So I climbed the steps. Block C has these steep concrete steps with a metal handrail that's always cold, and I went up them 2 at a time, calling out as I went so I wouldn't startle him. About halfway up I slowed down, because something about the way he was sitting had started to bother me. He was too still, not asleep still. People who are asleep slump. They lean. They have a neck. This man sat like he was watching something on the pitch with total attention, and the pitch was empty and dark. I got to his row. I stepped along it toward him and I said, "Mate, you all right?" And from about 3 seats away, I stopped. There was no one there. The seat was down. You know how stadium seats fold up when no one's in them. The spring pulls them up. This one was folded down, like a person had been sitting on it. And it was wet. There was a wet patch on the seat and on the concrete in front of it, a dark stain on the grey. And it wasn't raining, and it hadn't rained. The seats either side were dry and folded up. Just that one, down and wet, in the exact spot where I had watched a man sit and stare at the pitch for the better part of a minute. I want to be clear about something, because people always ask. I had not been drinking. I never drank on shift. not in 11 years. I had watched him from the bottom of the steps. I had watched him while I climbed. He had not got up. There was nowhere for him to go. Block C has one way in and out at each end of each row, and I would have seen him move on the open steps. He didn't pass me. He didn't go up, because the row behind him was the last row and the wall was solid concrete. He was there, and then I reached the row, and he was just gone, and the seat was down and wet like he'd melted into it. I stood there longer than I should have. I think part of me was waiting for an explanation to arrive in my own head, some ordinary version of events that would let me keep going about my night. It didn't come. So I did the only thing I could do, which was finish the job. I went back down the steps with my heart going hard, and I told myself I'd check the footage in the morning, even though we both know there's a reason I never did. I went to kill the last floodlight bank. The control box for the lights is in a little room off the main concourse, a panel with 4 big switches. I flipped the last one and waited for the buzz to die, the way it always did, that long, sad fade as the pylons cooled. And that's when I heard it, clapping. Slow at first, a single pair of hands, somewhere out in the dark of the now unlit ground. Then more. Then it built, the way a crowd builds when something good is about to happen, that swelling roll of applause that you feel in your chest as much as here. And under it, rising, a chant. The club's chant, the one the home end sings. The words too smeared together to make out, but the rhythm unmistakable. Hundreds of voices. Thousands. The ground was empty. The gates were locked. I had the only keys. I stood in the doorway of that little control room with my hand still on the dead switch, and I listened to a full house roar at a pitch with nothing on it, in a stadium I had walked end to end an hour before. The lights were off. It was pitch black out there over the terraces, and the noise was coming from the dark, from the empty plastic seats, from the concrete steps, from Block C. I did not go and look. I want you to understand that I had 11 years of experience, and not 1 ounce of courage left in my body that night. I walked, I did not run, to the staff exit, and I let myself out. And I locked the door behind me, with the chanting still going on inside, muffled now through the wall, fading as I crossed the car park, until by the time I reached my car, there was nothing but the ordinary hum of the town and the timer lights ticking off one by one. In the morning I came back, because I had to, because someone has to open up. The ground was exactly as it should be, quiet, cold, normal. I went up to Block C in the daylight, and I found the seat, folded down. The concrete in front of it had dried to a faint pale ring, the way a wet patch dries on concrete, the edges crusted slightly. 1 seat in the whole stand, down and dried. I folded it up myself. The spring took it. It snapped up like any other seat, like it had been waiting for me to do it. I handed my notice in that week. I told the manager it was my knees, the steps, my age. He believed me because it was a believable lie. I never told him the real reason, which is that for 11 years I had locked up an empty building, and I had been wrong. It was never empty. There was always someone in Block C, sitting straight, hands on his knees, watching a match that ended a long time ago, and I had just never stayed late enough to hear the crowd come back for him. I drive past Brackenwell sometimes, late, when I can't sleep. The floodlights are always off. The gates are always locked. And every now and then, if the night is very still and my window is down, I think I can hear it, faint, far off. That swelling roll of applause from a ground where no one is playing and no one is watching, except the man in Block C who never left, and who I think had been waiting a very long time for someone to finally come up those steps and sit down beside him. Studs on concrete. The thing I keep coming back to is that boots don't make that sound on their own. A football boot sitting on a shelf is silent. A pair of boots in a kit bag is silent. For studs to click on concrete, something has to be wearing them, and it has to be walking. There's no other way to make that noise. I've tried to talk myself out of it 100 ways, and I always end up back at that one fact, and that fact is what keeps me up. I was the kitman at Hollowmere Ground, which is the home of a club called Aldermore Town. Semi-pro, fourth tier of the regional pyramid, the kind of place where the players have day jobs and the manager mows the pitch himself in the summer. Being the kitman sounds glamorous if you've never done it. It isn't. You wash the kits, you lay them out, you sort the boots, you pump the balls, you fill the water bottles. You mop the changing room floor after the lads have tracked half the pitch in on their studs. It's the last job done on a match day, and it's a thankless one, but I liked it. I liked the quiet of the ground after a game, the smell of cut grass and liniment and the steam off the showers. I liked being the last one out. The tunnel at Hollowmere Ground is the oldest part of the ground. It's a low concrete corridor that runs from the changing rooms out to the edge of the pitch, maybe 20 yards long, with bare bulbs in cages along the ceiling and walls that sweat in cold weather. When the players walk out, their studs hit that concrete and the whole tunnel rings with it, this sharp metallic clatter that bounces off the walls. The lads used to bang on the walls as they went out to make it louder, to psych themselves up. It's a sound I heard 1,000 times. It's a happy sound normally, a sound of a game about to start. The night it stopped being a happy sound, I'd gone back for my phone. We'd had an evening game, a midweek league fixture, finished about 9:30. By 11 the players were long gone, the bar had emptied, the few hundred who'd turned up had drifted home. I'd done the changing room, mopped the floor, hung the kits, locked the kit store, and gone home myself. And about midnight, sat on my sofa, I realized my phone wasn't in my pocket. I knew exactly where it was. I'd put it on the bench in the home changing room while I was sorting the boots, and I'd walked off without it. I had a key. The ground was 5 minutes away, so I drove back. I'll be honest, the place is not somewhere I'd have chosen to go alone at that hour, but I wasn't frightened. It was just work, just a building I knew. I let myself in the side gate, locked it behind me out of habit, and went in through the players' entrance. The corridor lights were on the same circuit as the changing rooms, so I flicked them on as I went, and the strip lights buzzed and stuttered the way they always did before they settled. I could smell the place straight away. Wet turf, that earthy mud smell, sweat, the chemical tang of the showers, the ordinary smell of a ground after a game. Nothing wrong with it. The changing room was as I'd left it, mopped floor, still faintly damp, the lockers shut, the kits hung. My phone was on the bench, exactly where I'd left it. I picked it up, and that should have been the end of it. I should have walked out and driven home and never thought about Hollowmere Ground at midnight again. That's when I heard the studs. It came from the tunnel. That clatter, that sharp metallic click of boot studs on concrete, slow and even, one foot, then the other. Click, click, click. Coming from the dark end of the tunnel, the end that led out to the pitch and moving toward the changing room. Toward me. My first thought, the normal thought, was that one of the lads had come back, the same as me, for something he'd forgotten. But the lads don't walk around in their boots at midnight. You take your boots off. You change. And nobody had a key but me and the manager. And the manager was a 60-year-old man who'd have phoned me, not crept up the tunnel in studs. And the gate was locked. I'd locked it myself. I stood in the changing room doorway, and I looked down the tunnel, and the tunnel was empty. The lights were on. I'd put them on, bare bulbs in their cages all the way down, and I could see the whole length of it, the wet concrete shining, the far end where it opened to the pitch and the dark beyond. There was nobody in it, and the studs kept coming. Click, 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 slow and even, and getting closer. the sound moving up the tunnel toward me, each footfall landing on a patch of concrete where I could plainly see there was no foot. I have never felt anything like the cold that came over me then. It wasn't fear exactly, not the kind you can run from. It was the wrongness of it, the way my eyes and my ears were telling me two different things, and one of them had to be lying. I could hear someone walking up that tunnel as clearly as I can hear my own voice now. And the tunnel was empty, and the sound was perhaps 10 feet away and closing. I stepped back into the changing room. I don't know why. There was nowhere to go. The changing room is a dead end. But my body moved before my brain could stop it. And as I stepped back, I looked down, and on the floor I had mopped not 2 hours earlier, the floor that had been clean and damp and empty, there were footprints. Boot prints, stud marks, wet ones, leading in from the tunnel doorway, across the floor, in two neat lines like someone had walked in from the pitch with muddy boots. The pattern of the studs pressed into the damp like a stamp. They came in through the door, and they stopped in the middle of the room, the last two prints, side by side, toes pointing at the row of lockers, as if whoever made them had stopped there and turned to face the wall. And there were no more after that. The prints just ended, both feet together, facing the lockers, with nothing standing in them. And one of the lockers was open, the half door of it hanging ajar. I knew that locker had been shut. I shut every one of them myself, every single night. It's part of the job. You don't leave lockers open, or things go missing. It had been shut when I picked up my phone. It was open now, and from where I stood, I could see the cold air seemed to be coming off it. That sharp old smell of stale grass and sweat, of a kit that's been worn and never washed, rolling out of the dark of the open locker into a room where nobody but me was standing. The studs had stopped. I don't remember deciding to leave. The next thing I clearly remember is being out in the corridor and the side gate and then the car park, fumbling the key, my phone gripped in my hand so tight my fingers ached. I didn't lock the gate behind me, I left it open. I got in my car and I drove home with the heater on full, and I still couldn't get warm. The manager phoned me the next morning, and before he could say anything, I thought he was going to ask why the gate was open. Instead, he asked me, very oddly, very carefully, whether I'd been in the changing room after I'd cleaned it, because there were footprints all over the floor he'd just mopped, and he wanted to know who'd been walking through. He'd assumed I'd gone back in. I told him I had for my phone. He went quiet for a second, and then he said in his ordinary flat voice that he'd shut the locker, number 9. It had been hanging open. He said it like it was nothing, but I'd never told him a locker was open, and I never told him the rest. I didn't ask whose locker number 9 was. I think I didn't want to know. Some part of me had already worked out that the footprints came in from the pitch, that whoever made them had walked up the tunnel from a match in their boots, the way you do when the game is over, the way the lads always did, and had come into the changing room and gone to their locker the way you do at the end of every game you've ever played. The most ordinary thing in the world, just done by no one, at midnight, in an empty ground. I worked there another 2 years. I never went back at night again, not once. If a player left something, it stayed until morning. I'd make any excuse, and every night when I mopped that floor and shut those lockers, I'd shut number 9 last, and I'd press it firmly, and I'd wait a second to make sure it stayed shut, and then I'd go, and I would not look down the tunnel, because I knew that if I waited long enough and stood quiet enough, I would hear them again. The studs on the concrete, someone walking in from a game that finished a very long time ago, coming back to a locker that had been his, in a changing room that he must still, in whatever way he had left, think of as home. I hung my kit on the same peg by his locker for 2 years. I like to think he didn't mind sharing. The floodlights come back. On the scoreboard at Canwell Lane had been broken for as long as anyone could remember. It was one of the old ones, an electric panel up at the open end of the ground, with bulbs behind coloured plastic. And half the bulbs were dead, and the rest only worked when they felt like it. Nobody had bothered to fix it in years. The club couldn't afford to, and it didn't matter, because everyone who came knew the score anyway. So it just sat there, dark, at one end of an old ground in a town called Edenholm, a relic that nobody looked at twice. I tell you that first because the scoreboard is how it started, and you need to understand that it was broken. Properly broken, not asleep, not on standby, disconnected. The wiring to it had been cut years before. I found that out later, when all of this was over, and I went and asked. That panel had no power running to it at all. I was the groundsman at Canwell Lane. It's the kind of job you do because you love it, not because it pays. You're up before dawn, cutting and rolling and marking lines. You're there late seeing to the turf, and in between you fix whatever's broken, which at an old ground is everything. I lived in a flat about 200 yards from the ground, close enough that I could see the tops of the floodlight pylons from my kitchen window. That detail matters too. Hold on to it. The ground had a problem with the floodlights that summer. They'd been playing up, switching themselves off mid-warm-up, costing us money in call-outs. The electrician we used reckoned it was the aging timer and the old control gear, and he was probably right. So I'd got into the habit, after an evening game, of going down once everyone had gone, and double-checking the floodlights were properly off at the main board, because if they stayed on overnight, it would cost the club a fortune they didn't have. It was a 5-minute job. Down the road, into the ground, check the board, home to bed. The night this began was an ordinary night. We'd had a reserve game, finished early, maybe 9 o'clock, a thin crowd, nothing memorable. I did my usual. I went down about midnight, after the players, and the few staff had gone and the gates were locked, let myself in, checked the board. All 4 floodlight banks were off. The pitch was dark, the stands were dark. I locked up and went home and went to bed. I woke up sometime after 1. I don't know what woke me at first. Then I realized my bedroom was lit. There was a glow coming through the curtains that shouldn't have been there. A hard white-blue glow. And I knew that color. I'd know it anywhere. Floodlights. The Canwell Lane floodlights were on. All 4 banks, full power, throwing that cold white light up into the night sky over the rooftops. I swore, and I got dressed because all I could think about was the electricity bill and that faulty timer. I grabbed the keys and walked down, and the closer I got, the brighter it was. The whole sky over the ground washed pale, the way it looks on a big match night. I let myself in through the side gate, and I stood at the mouth of the tunnel, and I looked out at the pitch, and the pitch was lit up like a cup final. And the scoreboard was on. The broken scoreboard, the dead one, the one with no power to it, was lit. Not all of it. Half the bulbs were still gone, but it was showing something, glowing dull orange and red behind the cracked plastic in the dark at the far end. It read a score, the home figure and the away figure, and the minute, a number ticking, climbing as I watched, the way a match clock climbs. 61, 62, a game running, somewhere past the hour mark, on a board that had no electricity in it. I should have turned and gone to the boardroom and killed the floodlights and gone home. That was the sane thing. But I didn't, because while I stood there in the tunnel mouth, I heard the crowd. It came up slow, the way it does. A murmur first, 1,000 small sounds blending, the rustle and shift of a stand full of people. Then a shout, then the swell of it, a proper crowd, the noise of a packed ground on a big night, rolling around the bowl of the stadium and washing over the pitch. I could hear individual things in it. A man's voice bellowing something I couldn't make out. A burst of laughter from somewhere up in the stand. The slow build of a chant from the far end. The sound of thousands of people watching a game. The stands were empty, I could see them. The floodlights lit every row, every plastic seat, every step of the terrace, and there was not one single person anywhere in that ground. The seats were empty, the terraces were empty, and the noise of a full house came off them and broke over me where I stood, and I could feel it. The way you feel a real crowd, that pressure in the air, that warmth, except the night was cold and there was no one there at all. I made myself walk out onto the edge of the pitch. I don't know why. I think I needed to be sure. People always think certainty will calm them down, but sometimes being sure is the worst thing that can happen. I walked out from the tunnel onto the wet grass, under the full glare of those 4 floodlight banks, into the roar of a crowd that wasn't there. And I stood on the touchline and I looked at the pitch. There was a ball on the center spot. I had cut and rolled that pitch myself that morning. There had been a reserve game on it, and after a game the balls go back in the store. All of them, I count them. It's part of the job. There is never a ball left on the pitch overnight. But there was one now, sitting dead in the middle of the center circle, perfectly placed, the way you place a ball for kickoff. And as I looked at it, the crowd noise rose, that great expectant swell that comes just before a game restarts, that intake of breath of thousands of people waiting for the whistle. And the whistle came. It came from nowhere, from the middle of the empty pitch, from a referee who wasn't there, a sharp, clear blast that cut clean across the roar, and the crowd erupted, and on the center spot the ball moved. It rolled, just a yard, 2 yards, the way a ball rolls when it's been passed back at kickoff, struck by a foot that I could not see, and behind it the grass bent and sprang back in a line, a track pressing itself across the turf I'd rolled flat that morning, as something invisible carried the ball away from the spot and out across the pitch, and the scoreboard ticked over, and the crowd screamed the way a crowd screams when the game is alive again. I ran. I am not ashamed of it. I ran back up the tunnel and into the boardroom, and I threw every switch on the floodlight panel, all 4, and I heard the pylons cut out behind me. One bank, then another, then another, then the last, that dying buzz fading down to nothing. And as the lights went, the crowd went with them. As each bank cut out, the noise dropped, like the lights were holding it up. And when the last pylon went dark, the silence dropped over the whole ground all at once, total and immediate, the way silence never falls in real life. 1 second a full house roaring, the next nothing, just the wind and the rain starting on the turf, and my own breathing in the dark of the boardroom. I went home. I did not look back at the pitch. I lay awake until it got light. In the morning I went down with the manager and the electrician, because I'd phoned them both and told them only that the floodlights had come on by themselves in the night. The electrician went over the whole system. He told me the timer was faulty, that it could have triggered the lights, that it was exactly the sort of fault he'd been warning us about. I let him believe it, because that part might even have been true. But then I asked him about the scoreboard. I asked him, very carefully, whether there was any way the scoreboard could come on. And he laughed, and he took me over to it, and he showed me the wiring. The cable that fed it cut clean and capped off years before. No power to it, no way for it to light, nothing. He said it would take a man with tools half a day to even make it capable of switching on. He showed me the dead, dust-covered panel in the daylight, and he was right. It was dead. It could not have lit. But I'd seen it lit. I'd watched the minute climb. And there was one more thing. And I never told either of them about it, because there was no faulty timer that could explain it. When we walked out onto the pitch that morning, in the grey daylight, to check the surface, the ball was on the center spot, sitting dead in the middle of the center circle. And from the spot, faint but unmistakable in the dew, there was a track in the grass where something had rolled it away, and the turf had been disturbed. A single line curving out toward the far goal and stopping halfway, as if the move had broken down out there in the empty middle of the pitch and never been finished. I picked the ball up. I rolled the grass flat again. I told the manager one of the reserves must have left it out. He believed me, the same way they always believe the easy thing. I still work at Kenwell Lane. I never go down at night anymore, no matter what the floodlights are doing. We finally got the scoreboard taken out completely, ripped from the wall and scrapped, and I was glad to see it go. And I told myself that was the end of it. But I'll tell you what I've noticed since. The thing I can't make peace with. On certain nights, cold, still nights, I'll be lying in bed and the room will be dark, properly dark, the floodlights off, the ground locked and empty. And I'll hear it anyway, very faint, carried 200 yards on the night air through my kitchen window. A crowd, far off and thin, but a crowd rising and falling, the way a crowd does when a game is alive. And then once, clear across it, a whistle. The ground is empty, the lights are off, the scoreboard is gone. But somewhere down there, on the pitch I cut and roll and care for every single day, a game I cannot see is still being played. And the final whistle, the one that's supposed to end it, the one that sends everybody home, has never come. I don't think it's ever going to come. And I have started to understand that the worst thing about a stadium isn't that it empties out at the end of the night. It's that something in it never accepts that the game is over, and it waits, patient and certain, in the dark, for the next person foolish enough to walk in after midnight and stand on the touchline and listen. I don't listen anymore. I keep the kitchen window shut now, even in summer. But I always know when it's playing. You can feel it, 200 yards away, through a closed window, in the dead middle of the night. The whole town is asleep, and the ground is empty, and somewhere down there the crowd is on its feet,